Turn your why into a clear show promise. Welcome to the Podcast Why. I'm Brett Johnson, my podcast guy, your trusted friend in podcasting. The show is here to help you reconnect with your real why behind your podcast so you can keep showing up with clarity and confidence. In our last episode, we took your internal why, the reason you keep showing up to the mic, and turned it into a short 1 to 2 sentence statement you can actually look at. That why is your compass and your engine. It points you in the right direction and gives you the energy to keep going. Today, we're taking the next step, turning that internal why into an external show promise, something your listener can understand and feel in a few seconds. Your why answers, why do I make this show? Your promise answers, what do you, the listener, get if you keep pressing play? A lot of good shows stay vague at this level. The host cares, the content is thoughtful, but the promise is fuzzy. And a fuzzy promise makes it harder for listeners to decide, is this for me? And harder for you to decide, does this episode belong on this feed? So in this episode, I want to show you what it looks like to bridge that gap, to take your internal why and turn it into a clear, listener-facing promise that can shape your show description, your intro, and even your episode ideas. Let me give you a composite story that captures what I see all the time. Imagine a host, we'll call her Jamie. Jamie works in a specific professional niche. Her podcast had been running for about a year when she came to me. She had a decent catalog of episodes, a small but steady audience, and a genuine heart for the people she was serving. On the inside, her why was actually pretty clear. After some digging, she could say, I make this show because I want people in my field to stop feeling like they're barely holding it together. I want them to feel more confident and less alone in the day-to-day realities of this work. That's a strong human why. But if you looked at her public-facing materials, you wouldn't know that. Her show description said something like, a podcast about insights, strategies, and conversations for modern professionals. Her episode titles were all over the place. A little bit of mindset, a little bit of industry news, a little bit of tech tips. It wasn't wrong, but it was generic. A new listener wouldn't quickly answer, what do I get if I listen to 3 months of this show? When we talked, I asked her 2 questions. 1, what do you want your listener to believe or feel after they've been with you for a while? And number 2, if your show could make one promise to your ideal listener, what would it be? She thought about it and said, I want them to feel like someone is finally telling the truth about this work and giving them realistic ways to handle it. I want them to feel less isolated and more capable. Now we were getting close to a promise. We took her internal why statement and started to shape it into something listener-facing. Instead of, I make this show to help people feel less alone, we rephrased it as, if you listen to this show, here's what you can expect. After some back and forth, we landed on a simple show promise, something like, this podcast helps, specific kind of professional, feel less overwhelmed and more confident in their work with honest stories and practical strategies you can actually use. That became the heart of how she introduced the show, described it in podcast apps, and thought about new episodes. It was clear. It told the listener, this is for people like you. Here's how you probably feel. Here's what we're going to do about it together. Once she had that promise, a few things shifted. Her intro changed. Instead of a vague, welcome to the show where we talk about, she started saying something closer to a promise. If you're a specific professional who feels overwhelmed by the day-to-day and you're craving real talk and practical help, you're in the right place. When a new listener heard that, they could instantly say, that's me, or that's not me, which is exactly what you want. Her episode ideas changed too. When she brainstormed topics, she started holding them up against the promise. Does this help my listener feel less overwhelmed and more confident? Does this episode deliver either honest stories, practical strategies, or both? If the answer was no, it went on a different list. That saved her from chasing topics just because they were trendy in her industry. And her listeners started repeating the promise back to her. In emails and DMs, they'd say things like, your show really does make me feel less alone, or I love that your episodes give me something I can try this week. That's when you know your promise and your delivery are actually aligned. The important thing is this. We didn't invent something new for marketing. We simply took the why that was already in her heart and translated into clear language for her listener. Her internal engine became an external invitation. Now it's your turn to do that translation. You already have a 1 to 2 sentence why statement, or at least a strong draft. That's the internal version. What we want now is the listener-facing version, the promise. Here's a simple way to get there. First, start with your why statement from episode 1 of this season. For example, my podcast exists to help who, do, feel, understand what, by how do you do it, so that what changes for them. Now imagine you're speaking directly to a brand new listener who's never heard of you. They're scrolling through a long list of shows. They tap on yours. They see your cover art. They're hovering over the description. In 1 or 2 sentences, you tell them, this is who this is for, and this is what you'll get if you stick around. So we're going to flip the language from I make this podcast to into this podcast helps you to, here's a template you can use. This podcast is for who, and it helps you, core outcome or feeling, with the main way you do it, stories, teaching, conversations. Or even shorter, if you're a who, struggle or desire, this show will help you promise. You don't need to cram everything in, just the essentials. Here's today's why question. If a new listener only remembered 1 sentence about your show promises, what would you want this sentence to be? Write that down. Say it out loud. Ask yourself, does this sound like something my ideal listener would actually care about? Does this connect directly to my internal why, or did I drift into buzzwords? Is it specific enough that someone can tell if it's for them? If it feels too vague, try making it more concrete. Name the kind of person, name the feeling, name the kind of help you're offering. You can refine the wording over time, but get a solid version on paper now. Once you have a clear show promise, you can start using it in very practical ways, like in your show description on podcast apps, in your intro line each episode, as a filter for new episode ideas, and even on your website, wherever you talk about the podcast. If you'd like help turning your internal why into a promise that actually lands with your listener, something you can confidently put on your show page and in your intro, that's exactly the kind of work I do with podcasters. You can book a clarity call with me. Just head over to My Podcast Guy online and look for the Book a Clarity Call link. We'll take a look at your why, look at your ideal listener, and craft a promise that feels like you and makes sense to them. Thanks for listening to the podcast Why. I'm Brett Johnson, My Podcast Guy, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.